This episode is brought to you by Sable International, building futures beyond borders.
For me, it's about making sure that you have skills that you can take almost like a tortoise on your back anywhere you go, so that you're not reliant on a lifeline to South Africa to produce an income, because the reality is South Africa is not growing as fast as most of these other markets are.
Welcome back to the Relocated South African. Today I'm speaking with someone who has left Cape Town not once but twice. First for Brazil and now Southeast Asia. He's a father, a strategic thinker, he's future focused, and he's not shy to say what he thinks. Thanks for joining me, Janlo van der Heever.
Thanks for having me, Jan. Yeah, looking forward to the conversation and looking forward to hearing the feedback from the audience as well.
Lekker to have you. Just where are you talking to us from?
Currently in Bali. We've been in Bali in Indonesia now for just over 2 months, and I'm in the process of actually applying for my residency here to stay long term.
When I moved to Portugal, I had no idea how much paperwork was involved. Police clearances, apostille certificates, unabridged documents. It can feel overwhelming. Apostille takes care of it all for you. They apply, follow up, and courier everything directly to your door, whether you are still in South Africa or already settled abroad. Click the link in the description below and let Apostille take it from there. Okay. So let's just go back to the start. Where did you grow up, study, and how did you first leave South Africa?
Well, I was born and raised very Afrikaans in Pretoria, and went to school there in the north of Pretoria, and then also studied there, also studied at Tux. So went straight out of school to varsity, didn't do the gap year or the opportunity travel that many of my mates and family members did. I don't know what it was. I think something in me always told me that I'll have the opportunity to travel in the future, and I didn't need to rush it. I didn't need to, I guess, mortgage the predictable path of going to university, getting into the workforce, and take a risk at that point. My mom had actually worked really, really hard to make sure that I get into university, and she really was the one who made all that happen. So I wanted to honor that to a degree as well. So stuck with that. I originally started studying law, but it took me about 3 months to realize I wasn't going to cut it academically, and then switched 6 months into Bekombraai or bemarking or whatever it was called for business management at the time, and finished that in the allotted 3 years and got out of there because I'm a bit of an anti-academic, Jan. So it's a tough one for me to sit still and listen to other people talk for 3 years straight. So, it was really, I guess that was the start. It did give me a foothold. I mean, we're talking about very long ago now, about 20 years ago that I finished varsity. It did give me some opportunities to get into the world of work. And it didn't take me long to get into multinational companies. And basically with my first big multinational company, I worked with them in the Johannesburg office, commuting the lovely N1 commute every day from Pretoria to Johannesburg, actually from the north of Pretoria to the south of Joburg. So the ultimate, it was 75 Ks one way. But when you're young and you're starting out, you have to pay your dues and you have to do this stuff, right? I did it for about 3 years or so, 3.5 years, until I was around 26 or 27, and I was pushing for an opportunity to either move abroad with them or move to Cape Town, and they had an office in Cape Town. So I ended up there, and then about a year and a half after landing in Cape Town, one of my clients from that company actually poached me. This was Red Bull, the energy drink company. And then after another 5 years in Cape Town with Red Bull, during which I traveled a fair amount, and I really got into the idea of traveling and maybe leaving the country and seeing what's out there for me. They were the ones who moved me to Brazil. After I was actually scoping out a move with them to Austria, to the head office. Decided to go to Brazil instead, and that was the first time that we left Cape Town. But I had just gotten married. My wife and I had been married for about a year at that point, and both of us really felt like we wanted to go and explore. And no kids at that stage yet, so it was much easier than it is now.
Yeah, I can imagine. Wow, Red Bull, that I remember one of the highlights of a visit to Austria was that museum at the airport in Salzburg. If you're a motor car and aeroplane fanatic, that's the place to go. It was amazing.
Yes, Hangar 7. That's actually the only place I ever met the original founder, the Dietrich Mateschitz, was at Hangar 7. And yes, I was fortunate enough to travel quite frequently to Salzburg in Austria for business planning and all sorts of different things with Red Bull. I actually went to, in the end, something like 23 or 24 countries on Red Bull business. So it was a really great springboard for seeing the world and also actually for learning how to be entrepreneurial.
And were you in the marketing, branding side, or what role did you have?
No, I wasn't allowed to have that much fun, unfortunately. I was in the boring side, I guess. I was in trade marketing, so that's part of the sales function. So I was working more closely with the retailers on strategic initiatives. So I was working with the Walmarts and the Spars, and in South Africa with the Pick and Pays and these guys.
Okay. Last question about Red Bull. Did they allow you to go to the Grand Prix?
This is a sore one, Jan, because I actually did negotiate it into one of my year-end bonuses. And then I don't know why I did this. I guess at the time I was really just set on being a good leader and a good team manager because I was starting to build up a small team there. I had 5 or 6 people at this point. And at one point, there was a really good shop marketing conference on in New York. And I couldn't get budget to go, but then I kind of traded in my single ticket to go to Monaco for 3 of us going to this conference in New York. So was very altruistic at the time, but I definitely sort of regret it now.
Taking one for the team. I have to say, that's the one thing we realized. We were at one of the Grand Prix 2022, living in Monaco, and we were looking out over the sea. We had a view, and they were bringing this barge. You could see this from miles away, and we were watching this barge coming in. And that ended up being their party barge, which they anchored there. And
the
those
energy
guys...
zone.
Oh, it's amazing. That shows you what they can do. Interesting. So, and then after Brazil, what made you leave?
Sorry, but I will add, I did get the chance to meet the drivers. They came through when I was in the Sao Paulo office, they obviously came for the race at least once a year. So I did get to meet Max and Danny at the peak of their rivalry. They were literally having a bit of a dispute in the office there while we were all playing PlayStation. I did get to touch on the world and live in the world, but no, I still haven't made it to a race, but I'm still holding thumbs here.
Yeah, it was interesting. I had a quick geography lesson after I spoke to a guy the other day who lives in Brazil, but he's in the south. I didn't realize Brazil was so big, 220 million people. I mean, I was flabbergasted. And were you in Sao Paulo?
Yes, we were based in Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo can be a bit of a minefield. If you're in the wrong area, you'll notice pretty quickly, but we were fortunate to stay, I think, in one of the better areas in the center of Sao Paulo. I don't know, we had a very, very safe, very fun life. People are wonderful and friendly and accommodating, and always interested to speak to people that are not from there. So, no, we really loved it. We ended up being there for 2 years and having our first daughter there, who's also Brazilian.
Oh, wow. And just lifestyle, food, and we don't have to spend much time, just the lifestyle and the food in Brazil. It looks attractive to us living in Portugal. I guess there's some similarity.
I must say I had a very cool experience living there because of the area that we lived and the fact that I could walk to the office or sometimes take my bicycle to the office. So that was a nice change from sitting in the car for 2 hours or whatever at a time. So it was almost like a European way of living, thanks to where we lived and where the office was. I mean, if I had to drive my car, Red Bull gave me a car. I don't know why, but if I had to drive my car in peak traffic to get to the office or back, that would take probably an hour to do 3 or 4 kilometers. So you may as well walk that, right? And then you're walking through like really interesting little areas. You can stop for a beer. You can pop into the grocery store on the way home, pick up some flowers for the wife, do whatever. And I never really had that experience because everything is so car-based in South Africa. You have to be quite intentional about, I'm going here and then here and then here, and everyone kind of lives like that. So it was my first opportunity to live a little bit differently, and I loved how it felt, to be honest.
That's excellent.
As for the food, I didn't get into the food, to be honest. Acai, sure, like acai bowls are great and amazing, but it's also only because there's so much sugar in them. And then the national dish, the pork and beans and rice, the feijoada, it wasn't really for me, to be honest. So I don't think back to the food, but I always think back to the people and the kindness of the people and the friends that I made there.
Excellent. Let's just quickly touch on it, you mentioned that your wife had your daughter there. Just from a healthcare perspective, for people who are thinking about immigrating, how was that, and how does that, for instance, compare to South Africa?
It was actually great. The reason we ended up going to Brazil, not Austria, I mean, there's a couple of reasons, but one of the biggest driving factors was that the commercial director, who was going to be my new boss in Brazil, he had recently actually moved from Cape Town to Sao Paulo himself and had some kids there. So they had found some English-speaking doctors and, gynecologists and all these people that would be difficult to find. So they had basically a playbook for us to play. And with Red Bull, I had really top-tier expat medical care. So that was far superior to anything I'd experienced in South Africa. And when I tell people that, they generally look at me like I'm having it on. But actually, there was no doubt about it. The dental care, the general care, especially for my wife when she was pregnant, the process was almost a little bit too arduous. They were almost a little bit too all in on frequent checkups and thorough checkups, and in South Africa you can kind of pace it yourself, but there, once you are enrolled as a patient, basically they really have a strong system that ensures you're healthy and well throughout the whole process. So I don't know, I was quite surprised it was significantly better than the private care that I was also getting in South Africa.
Okay, yeah, I must say there's a lot. Apparently the dentistry is very good. There's a bunch of Brazilian dentists here in our town that practice here, and they're very good. Training apparently is excellent. So, Janlo, and then you went back to Cape Town. What prompted that?
So, unfortunately, while we were in Brazil, my wife's father got ill, and we decided, with the small baby with us, our kid was 1.5 years old. It would be better if we were closer to home. I didn't want her to have any regrets about being away from her dad while he was ailing, just because we wanted to be, out and live this international lifestyle. So we decided to go back. Initially, we didn't go back to Cape Town because they were all based up in Gauteng area and Northwest. We settled in Pretoria for a year. We then got stuck in Johannesburg over COVID for another 2 years, as life happens, and had our second child there during COVID. And it was only about a year, it was like 22, I think, that we made it back to Cape Town. And then we were in the Somerset West area. I could never go back to the southern suburbs or, the center of Cape Town. With 2 kids, it's not very kid-friendly now. So we were out there in Somerset West. That was a really great life. Really enjoyed this new experience of it, right? Because when I was a student and traveling down or going to the wine farms, it's one experience, but how much they cater for kids and, the fact that there's open lawn and playgrounds, and they're very open to having, kids parties and all these things. All the kids parties happen at the wine farms anyway. That was a great experience, and we loved it for 3 or 3.5 years we were down there.
And were you still working for Red Bull at the time?
No. So when I left Brazil, I also left Red Bull. There was really no path forward that made sense to me. They wanted me to go back and forth for, a month at a time, fly in, fly out, and transition across to the local team where there wasn't an immediate gap for me. And I kind of realized in those years that I was in Latin America that I was an absolute dinosaur, probably by South African standards, I was quite clued up and experienced and well-skilled. But by global standards, I started measuring myself, a bit differently when I was in Brazil. LATAM for me, in terms of tech and development and business in general, is people used to say the UK is 5 years ahead or the US is 10 years ahead of South Africa. LATAM is interesting because it's just like 3 years or so ahead of South Africa, 3 or 4 years ahead. So the gap is a bit smaller, but at the same time, it's very visible. For innovation at Red Bull, I was dealing a lot with these on-demand startups that are, you can order on the app right now and they deliver in 15 minutes. The guy sometimes comes with a bicycle and still does it in 15 minutes and brings you, a lot of stuff. And I always marveled at that, to be honest. I was working with the biggest one in LATAM called Rappi, headquartered in Colombia. So every time I would go to Bogota, I would see these guys, and I would really, really sit there and feel like a total dinosaur. And there were also some of the team that were working with Amazon and these guys for more traditional e-commerce, but that didn't excite me as much as this. And I just realized I don't know anything about tech. I'm like a retail marketing dinosaur, and I needed to pivot. And so I took the opportunity when we went back, when we were in Pretoria and in Johannesburg, to start trying, to learn more about startups, to learn more about coding and tech and all this kind of stuff, and to try and see if I could build something of my own.
Okay. Excellent. And then another move. What was this, a push or a pull this time to go to Southeast Asia?
So the interesting thing is, in that gap between going back to South Africa and leaving, I developed a completely new skill set and also a very different worldview. I had gone from being this very corporate employee type, punch in, punch out, 9 to 5 type person to thinking very non-linearly about my time and what I do. And I was becoming, just a lot more intentional about what I was learning and upskilling myself. And for most of my time in Cape Town, I was actually working in startups. I was working in a big edtech startup that had been blowing up in the UK and working with the UK's Department for Education, working remotely with this team. And then I did work also with one of the biggest YouTube channels in crypto. And for me, that was interesting because in COVID, a lot of people got into crypto. I didn't have a job at one point. I was just focused on my own startup, but I was leaning into this a lot because actually when I was in Brazil originally, I had traveled a lot to Argentina, and this was quite interesting. In South Africa, I was sort of put in charge. One of the many things I was in charge of was pricing, and because of the affordability issues in South Africa, especially for a brand trying to break into the main market, I had fought tooth and nail for 5 years to try and keep the price of Red Bull stable, in terms of how we manage pricing through the retailers and back to the head office. Because everything is imported, of course, nothing is made in South Africa. And that did allow Red Bull in South Africa to really increase in penetration and grow a lot. And I was very proud of that. Every year I need to fight off these guys who just want us to increase price, and I'm gonna be the man of the people and make sure we can put a can in everyone's hand and keep it affordable. And then, I think I've traveled to Argentina in the 2 years. I think I traveled 12 times to Buenos Aires in those 2 years. I landed there and they were like, listen, we have a couple problems, but one of your first priorities is going to be pricing in Argentina because they're running at 115% inflation. And I was like, what does that mean? I understood inflation based on what the government tells you about CPI, but I didn't really understand how it happened or what are the major events that can occur that can create such hyperinflation. And so when I started digging into it, the first thing I realized was all of these guys are obviously not saving their money in pesos or anything. They're all buying gold, and some of them were starting to buy Bitcoin. And it was cool for me because in that time when I was in LATAM, I think a lot of the big crypto Bitcoin scams went down in South Africa, but I got the clean version. I got the very much like, this is hard programmable money. It's not that programmable, but hard digital money, similar to a digital gold. And I decided to buy some. And then I kind of forgot about the fact that I had this account. And I actually thought that when I had registered with my Brazilian ID that I wouldn't be able to get it back when I was in South Africa. But long story short, to tell you, I basically got all that back in 2021. Saw that it had 7x since I had bought it, and started really deep diving this crypto thing a lot more. I guess in a way that a lot of guys do, and they speak to the wife, and the wife just glazes over. My wife was that for sure, but we just keep forward because we believe there's maybe something here. There's an opportunity here. So the channel I was watching most of the time while I was in Johannesburg was called Crypto Banter. They had just kind of started taking off, and when I got to Cape Town, I really, really wanted to work with these guys. As a matter of fact, I was very set on just taking them up on this offer they had to come work in their offices. Even if you're working obviously on something else or for someone else, just come work in our offices. And I never did that, but I did actually end up getting an interview there and landing the jobs. I did work there for a year and a half with the guys, some of the best traders in the world, honestly. Some really inspiring people from places like Boxburg who had $400 to their name and turned it into literally an empire, and learned a lot in that phase. And from then, I really didn't want to work in any other field. I really didn't want to move away from Web3 or crypto. And so even after that role ended, I decided, okay, I'm going to start taking on clients who work in this space, and I'm going to bring together the startup tech side and call it the traditional brand and marketing side, because a lot of these businesses are trying to go mainstream. And there's a lot of what we learned at Red Bull that you can apply. But the other cool thing is you basically get to create all new stuff. When I basically figured out that I was going to be remote indefinitely, it was a very long way to get to the point, but I think the context is important. When I basically figured out I was set on being remote indefinitely and never going back into the office, I decided, okay, cool, but then is Cape Town still the best option? I've got 2 young girls. Is this really the best place to raise them? And I mean, stuff goes down even in Cape Town. I think a lot of Joburg is moving down to Cape Town, and they're taking a lot of the issues with them, to be honest. And so even in the sleepy areas of Somerset West and Strand, we started having issues like the house cleaner couldn't come today because there was a shooting at her local taxi rank, or we had to fetch the kids from school early because there was a shooting at the mall, and this kind of stuff. And it came much closer to us than I had expected. You leave Joburg and you think, okay, cool, I'm leaving all that behind. But it had started not following us. A lot of people had been through a lot worse, like my wife's family had been through much worse. But I just didn't want to have my kids in the firing line of any of this, or myself for that matter, or my wife, of course. We were looking at options. We were actually looking at coming to Portugal at one point. But I have a couple of opinions about how Europe runs and how Portugal's affected by that. We decided to look at Asia. I'd been traveling for crypto work a lot more to Asia, or to the, I would say, privileged cities like Hong Kong and Singapore, for major conferences and big meetings. And there was something about it that just resonated with me. It was probably the more traditional values, maybe the more conservative values. There's still really strong family values here. And we didn't feel like going back to Brazil. So we decided, okay, we're going to pack up, we're going to put all our stuff in storage, and we're going to go and check it out. We're going to go see Thailand, we're going to go see Vietnam, and we're going to go see Bali in Indonesia, and then decide where we want to settle. And so at the end of last year, that's what we did. Went to Bangkok for a few weeks. I went to 2 different spots in Vietnam, and then after that came here to Bali in Indonesia. And I think it was 3 days in that we looked at each other and said, this is a really special, very different kind of life, and we could see ourselves staying here long term. So yeah, now it's 2.5 months and counting.
Excellent. I think just to the point that you made about living in bubbles, I think the problem even in Cape Town, we lived in De Zalse in Stellenbosch, and you have to leave your bubble to go to the store, and we were cyclists, and you have to go out to cycle. Our friends got attacked and so on. So it is unfortunately one of the things, in South Africa. I think you made the point in our conversation that you don't want your kids exposed to DEI-based initiative, and that you thought the political situation is retarded. Do you see that changing in any way?
Not in the medium term, not in the short or medium term, right? Like in the long term, I must say the new generation's very switched on, and I think the fact that we all have a lot more data, a lot more information is useful, right? Because if you've raised the Rainbow Nation on propaganda, then they're going to live off that preload for quite a while. It'll take like half a generation for things to change. And you get to make the choice whether you want to sit and wait it out, or do your part to fight for it, or whether that energy is potentially better used elsewhere. And that's the choice that I made. And I mean, it's not that I love South Africa. My parents are there, our friends and family are all there, and we miss them dearly. It's that part doesn't change. And I definitely didn't leave with any hate or anything like that in my heart. But yeah, there's a couple different dynamics that you can now see quite clearly again. I think about like your typical metro police roadblock, right? How antagonistic and aggressive that is. And here I don't see the police unless something goes wrong. They have a completely different agenda, a completely different modus operandi, and we accept all that as normal in South Africa. And it actually, if you travel enough, you realize no, it's actually not the norm. It's the exception, and staying there is an active choice to submit to all that. And I don't know, if you have options which every person needs to create for themselves, then I don't really see why you would subject yourself to that for long periods of time. And the bubble piece that you mentioned is super true. We were in a Paardenvlei, right? Paardenvlei is also a very nice locked up estate. I was able to walk around the Vlei every morning. That was beautiful, right? Like that's Africa at its best, and it's very safe in the estate and around the estate. But even there, just when they started developing around, things really started to change quite quickly. And I don't know, it's just it's just, again, if you have already got that perspective of what life is like in other places and you've traveled enough, it doesn't become such a, I'm going to, give up everything I have here to be able to go and experience something different. It's very much not goodbye, just see you later.
And I think, there's a perception, I think maybe wrongly, but in South Africa, that people who leave are disloyal to the country. And I think that's absolutely wrong. I think it's wrong to judge people who want to go elsewhere, to go and experience other countries, and may go back, who may decide to stay. But I just think it's very bad to judge people. You also made a point, which when we communicated, you said there's no kindness on the streets. Was there anything specific that made you think that way? And added to that, where you are now, do you get a different sense of of sort of kindness of people on the streets.
Yeah, I mean, you only need to get on the highway for 5 minutes to understand what I'm talking about. You don't need to have a run-in with anyone. But the whole place is highly charged. I have a very, very good friend, Jacques or Jakkels, you'll probably watch this, who recently moved as well. They're in Australia, north of Sydney, and they had just completed now, actually, recently, a visit back for the first time. And his feedback was, it's lovely. It was amazing seeing everyone. Really missed the place, but everyone seems so on edge, and it's that edge that I'm talking about. It's the fact that everyone seems like they could snap at any given moment if you put a foot wrong or if you say the wrong thing, and tensions are so high that you end up being very tense and you end up being very controlled by all of that. So I don't know. I'll give you a good example, right? In Brazil, it's in Sao Paulo, okay? Big city, 22 million people, complete chaos, gridlock, and everything. The road that I used to take to work has, I think, 5 or 6 lanes in each direction. And if you are a person who decided, goodness, I'm in the far right lane and I need to turn left here, and you put your indicator on, people will kind of go like, oh my gosh, okay. And then they'll make space for you, and no one's going to hoot at you. They won't even hoot at you, let alone swear at you or pull out a baseball bat or anything like that, right? Everyone is very much aware, like, oh, okay, cool. They must have miscalculated, and it's okay. There's that grace that you have for people. But in South Africa, you put 1 foot wrong, you move 1 inch too close to me, you go out your lane by this much. There's aggression. There's always an aggressive response back. And here in Bali, it's like the ultimate, the absolute opposite. Many people might not know because Indonesia is a Muslim country, but Bali is actually the exception. It's very much a Hindu island, and the Balinese people are, for that reason, majority Hindu and very peace-loving and actually just incredibly generous and kind, even though they don't have that much to offer. It's not like this is a very rich place. People think about Bali and they think about the luxury resorts and the supermodels and the beautiful people that are all here, and they are all here. I can tell you, they definitely are all here. But more than that, the local people are very humble, and something that's quite beautiful. They put out, according to their customs and religion, they put out little offerings on the street corners, and they do this in many parts in Asia. We saw this in Vietnam as well. But they put out these little offerings on street corners and outside houses and all sorts of things on a daily basis. The women prepare these. It's like a little folded. Is it a palm leaf or banana leaf? I never know. With some flowers and crackers, and there's like a whole little setup in there. And the reason they do this is actually to promote harmony and to make sure that area has peace and harmony. And I've even heard that if you're in your villa and you're shouting at your kids or shouting at your family, you can expect one of those suckers outside your door the next day.
Okay.
Someone will hear you and actually come the next day and put an offering down on your behalf to bring peace and harmony to your home. So no, they're the extreme opposite, and that's one of the things that we absolutely love about being here. And we are doing our little bit to learn the language. It's not so simple, but there's some formative Dutch in there, which is helpful. Because this used to be a Dutch colony also. But more than anything, you can see it. People are smiling. People are still poor. They're not necessarily wealthy, but they are smiling. I love how the expats that are here generally work really well with that and reward that. So it's been great
awesome
for us.
And cost of living wise, I always ask, what's the price of a cappuccino? I don't know if you get a cappuccino there in a place where there's lots of resorts. That's not the cost of living if you go to a resort. But outside of that, is life relatively cheap?
Yeah, so I would say we have a similar setup to what we had being in Somerset West to what we have here. We are about, call it 45 minutes outside the big city, which is Denpasar. And so we're out in the rice fields. So similar to me being out in the Vlei, right? In Somerset West. And I would say if you're talking about a cappuccino, it's about depends on where you go. There are some very fancy places here, right? Like I used to think Cape Town cafes, are very much on par with the best cafes in the world. And they are. You go to Sea Point, you find really pretty cafes, and they'll charge you 60 Rand now for a cappuccino. Here at probably the nicest place, you might pay the equivalent of 40 or 45 Rand. So it's probably about 40 to 50% cheaper in general.
Oh, wow.
And at my local, I would pay 30. In some places, you would pay half. The food is generally about half, unless you're going for steak or something like that. But the meat isn't that expensive because you actually have Australia right next door shipping quite a lot of meat here. So there are a couple guys even selling biltong on the island, but that comes at a premium.
Premium, obviously. Things like rent and accommodation, again, compared maybe to Cape Town?
I would say it's still slightly cheaper, probably 20% cheaper than Cape Town. And you have a couple different options here. You can't buy. You can't buy and own freehold. So everything is rent or owning leasehold, which is, between a 25 or 35-year lease, at the end of which you completely, return the property back to the owner. Any improvements or anything you make to the land, reverts back to the owner when the lease ends. So the only way to own land here is to do it through a company, and setting that up can be quite expensive and a little bit, I would say, covered in red tape, right? So the majority of people would rent here, and the option that you have here is to pay your rent up front and get something like 40-30% off the annual rental. So that's actually a pretty good deal. If you do that, you can have a comparable 3 or 4 bedroom place here for half the price of what you would pay in Cape Town. But then, you'd need to pay your rent in advance for the year to secure that kind of rate.
And taxes? I mean, would you now be taxed in Indonesia as a taxpayer?
Yes, once we have spent obviously enough time here for that to materialize, we would be Indonesian tax residents. But there are a couple of favorable things. I run my consultancy through a company structure as well, and I have multiple clients, so that's already better than just being an employee and paying the full rate.
Okay.
But the other thing that's interesting is that on trading, they have a very low tax as well. It's not taxed as per your personal income tax rate. They have a very strange mechanic whereby you just pay basically a closing fee on all transactions. So for traders, it's actually a very, very good place to base yourself.
Excellent. And you mentioned that you're looking at residence there. Is that quite difficult, or what's the red tape like for that?
It's not bad. You effectively have to just have some money. If you can prove some funds and you can prove your intention, like in my case, I have enough remote work to prove that I'm working remotely for clients that are not Indonesian based. So, it's a pretty clear-cut case, very easy to get their remote worker visa. There are also other visa options like investor visas and entrepreneur visas. Once I've been here for a year, I'll probably switch to a different visa type. But for now, it's easy to settle down with the family using what they call their KITAS remote worker visa.
Okay, excellent. And with kids, I don't know what age your kids are, but would they be starting to look at schooling, international schooling? What would happen on that front?
So part of what drove us to go and explore was the fact that we wanted to have more time with our kids. We had our kids in private schools in South Africa. They're now 5 and 9, and we didn't really like how that felt. I don't know what it was, if it was the clickiness, if it was the comparison thief stealing all of our joy. It could be that one. But it's very, especially down there in the winelands, it can get very snooty and snobby, and it wasn't really for me. We made some really great friends there, so there are definitely some exceptions to that, right? But in general, my experience of private school wasn't that great. Same with the actual level of education that the kids got. I'm pretty set on separating education and schooling because they are, for me, 2 separate things, and I wanted to be more involved in my kids' education, which for them still involves some fundamental schooling. So what we decided to do is to homeschool the kids, and bring on a nanny, which kind of acts like a tutor for the younger one, who's was in a Montessori primary for most of her time, and creates a little bit of buffer for us in the afternoons when my wife and I need to work on the business and a couple different things. Effectively, we are not thinking of putting them back in schools now that they've had a taste of freedom. And I think the 5-year-old, maybe she would love to still go to school, and I think she would benefit from going to school. So for her, we're actually thinking of it. But my 9-year-old is dead set on doing her own thing. She loves her freedom. She doesn't want to be back in the cage, as she calls it. So I think she'll probably want to explore her options and opportunity. I do all the math and stuff with her. I love doing that with her. I actually can't imagine going back to a life where I don't have that hour or maybe even hour and a half with her. And the cool thing is, because of the time zone and where my clients are, my mornings are quite open and I'm able to do that.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Just, have you guys been exposed to any healthcare issues there? Do you know how it works?
So I have pretty good remote, call it like full remote worker health insurance, which we've brought on for the rest of the family. And we haven't had too many issues to deal with. Luckily, we had a couple issues on my wife's side when she was in Vietnam, but she was able to get most of that sorted. It's a bit difficult to get some of the medication here that we're used to, but at the same time, not really. A lot of people talk about landing immediately and getting Bali belly. We haven't had that, but yeah, you do have to be careful with the water here because it definitely doesn't go through, the same treatment process as it does in South Africa. I'm still not sure if it's a good or a bad thing, but the water is very hard, so you need filters on all the taps and showers to ensure you don't go completely bald. I've actually definitely had a number done on me since coming here. And then realizing I need these filters. It wasn't too bad of an investment, but at the same time, if you're in the pool or you can't ask for tap water at a restaurant, it's not an option.
Yeah. And in terms of just friends, are you friends with a lot of expats, a lot of South Africans there, or how are you adapting to that?
Yeah, so we've made a couple friends quite quickly. The nice thing is when we came, we weren't alone. Actually, one of my colleagues from Red Bull in my Latin American days, who I worked with in Sao Paulo, is settled here. And runs businesses this side and works in real estate, which is also why we felt like, okay, we can come here and have some connection. And he's been great introducing us to other families who have kids. But at the same time, there's a lot of opportunities for kids to mingle and socialize. And that's why I'm not too concerned about them not socializing if they're homeschooling. A lot of the kids are either homeschooling in the morning, all going to school in the morning, and then they all have play dates in the afternoon. So I don't know, my kids have made friends with other kids and families from Russia, from France. I have actually a South African living right next door to me who's also from Somerset West, living with an Australian guy, and on the other side we have a Brazilian family. So I don't know, it's pretty international where we are, but at the same time, yeah, we haven't had a chance really to, besides your typical barbershop interactions and these kind of things, to connect with the locals.
But it sounds like you guys are very well settled. Have you talked about the Bali belly? Do you like the food? Are you adapted to the food, or do you eat pretty much Western style food?
We eat more Western food, I'll be honest. There's a wonderful local dish called nasi goreng, which I can definitely eat any day of the week. It's just basically noodles, rice, and eggs. So for me, that's not a problem at all. With some chicken or with some mince in it. The local food is good, but it also is varied. They do curry here because it's not a fully Muslim population, but both the Muslims and the Hindus here love eating curry, right? So. Mm-hmm. I would eat more if it wasn't so hot most of the time. But yeah, the local food is really good. And I think we have yet to really scratch the surface of what we can enjoy in those terms. But because the kids are pretty fussy, it's really difficult to order something like that and then they also eat from that. So for the sake of everyone eating, it could quite often end up being just like beef stir fry or pizzas even from down the roads. Yeah, I think as we stay here longer and as we travel also more of Bali outside of this bubble area that we're in, clearly, we'll definitely get into it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not long that you've been there, but what do you miss most apart from family about South Africa?
I was missing the biltong until one of our new South African friends showed up with a big bag the other day. So that was great. That was great. As I mentioned, she was able to buy it from someone on the island, but I think it was 800 Rand a kilo. So it's a bit of a premium on what you would pay back home at your Checkers or your local butcher. Everyone says biltong and dribbles. It's a bit cheesy. I guess affordable wine is another one. Having lived in the winelands and being used to unwinding with a glass of wine, the wine here isn't that great. And there are great wines here, but they're all imported. And as we know, South African value is exceptional wine, or wine is exceptional value, sorry. So yeah, I mean, it's really sometimes the braais, sometimes just more than the braais, the friends, right? As you mentioned, the friends and family. But I don't know. I'm the kind of person that likes to look forward and not look back too much. I keep in touch with my good mates all the time. We share a lot of new music, and we've stayed actively in contact around our interests. So we do connect, and actually, it's almost like a bit of a revolving door there in Cape Town. I'm in Brazil, and then I'm back, and then when I'm back, someone's in Isle of Man, and then the guy from Isle of Man comes back, and then I leave again, and then this guy's moved to Australia. So we've all kind of settled into a rhythm that we're not going to constantly be together, but we will always stay in touch, and we'll always remain friends, and we'll always have each other's backs. And I think just that reassurance for me is enough.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Getting to the end. So a lot of people can't just pack up and leave. What would you say to somebody who's sort of on the fringe of wanting to leave? Should I leave? Should I stay? What's your view?
My personal take is that the biggest thing standing in the way of South Africans being successful all over the world is staying in South Africa, because it does put a ceiling on what you believe is possible and the way that you approach your work and your life and even just your daily routine. Because it very much, and it's the same for anyone from anywhere, to be honest. Like for a Brazilian who grew up in Brazilian culture where kids stay up until 11 p.m. and where they do X and Y like this, they will also challenge their own norms by moving abroad. So there's no perfect combination on this lock. It's not that. It's very much just like what's ideal for your next chapter. And the chapter I'm in right now is very much a building chapter where I'm building businesses and I'm building up my profile and a whole bunch of different things. And I actually can't afford to not focus more fully on that. It's almost like I wanted to remove myself from the usual distractions and allow myself the space to focus. So I think if someone's in that space, they should definitely consider it. The main thing, though, is to make sure that you future-proof your skills, because a lot of people in South Africa have skills that are not relevant for 2026. And so it's quite important that you make sure that if you're going to do something like this, that you are well set in a new path and that you are in demand and well skilled for the future world of work. The future world of work is going to be much less corporate, much less in the office. So I think there will still be offices, but instead of 1,000 people in one office, there's going to be 10 different companies with 100 people each. The companies will all get smaller, and there's a lot more room for people to do their own thing. A lot of South Africans are very comfortable working in corporate, having a salary, getting their pension fund paid for them. But at the same time, what you're giving up for that is a real compromise in most cases. So, and your tax rate's just way higher. There's a whole bunch of taxes one, time is another. And then, I've been in legal disputes in South Africa with employers, right? Like, they really do own you. So it's a really tricky one. But yeah, for me, it's about making sure that you have skills that you can take almost like a tortoise on your back anywhere you go, so that you're not reliant on a lifeline to South Africa to produce an income, because the reality is South Africa is not growing as fast as most of these other markets are. And so if you want to grow, then you should go tether yourself to other things that are growing. Otherwise, you're going to be swimming against the stream, and it's going to be so much more difficult for you to accomplish what you want to do. So if you can release yourself from that and free yourself from that and tether yourself to something that's growing faster, that's why so many people decided to learn Mandarin and move to China, right? Because they saw the GDP growth or to Asia in general. They see the GDP growth, they realize like, wow, okay, if I just go there and I'm average, then everything I have is going to grow by at least that rate. And that's true. It's exactly how it works. And in a lot of these countries, not Indonesia, but in a lot of these countries, inflation is actually very, very low. And there's much better monetary and fiscal policy. So if you are saving money, you are actually saving it. The government isn't debasing it faster than you can put it in your bank account. So, everyone needs to think about their own financial situation, their appetite for risk, because there are some risks, there are some things that can go wrong. But I feel like if you are skilled enough and in demand enough, you can overcome all those things.
Awesome, man. That was such a good conversation. If people want to know more about you, where's the best place to find you, on LinkedIn or your website?
Yeah, I guess both of those. They can find me on LinkedIn, or my website is janlo.xyz. And yeah, always happy to have a chat or drop me an email, and happy to catch up with any fellow South Africans who've relocated abroad.
Excellent, Yanda. Thank you so much for sharing your journey, your perspective on living in Brazil and Southeast Asia. Really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Thanks for having me. It's been great.
Before we wrap up, if documents are on your to-do list, Apostille handles everything and will courier it directly to you. I've linked Apostille in the description below. Well worth a look at if documents are on your list. And to our listeners, if this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who might enjoy the conversation. You can find more episodes of The Relocated South African on your favorite podcast platform, or visit therelocatedsoutafrican.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.
This episode is brought to you by Sable International, building futures beyond borders.